Good morning, and welcome back to this August edition of Town Hall with our city's leaders. This program is designed to provide direct citizen access and participation with our elected and professional officials, and we greatly appreciate their willingness to take your questions live and direct. I'm Marco Garcia, the host of Doris Radio Show and head of Millennials Demanding Change.
And I'm Dave Wooten, former mayor of this city from 92 to 2000. On today's show, as every month, we are joined by Cambridge Mayor Andrew Bradshaw, and this month's special guest, Police Chief Mark Lewis, and City Engineer Pat Escher. We look forward to taking your questions in chat, and with no further ado, I'm going to ask the Mayor to introduce today's special guest after he provides his opening remarks. Mayor Bradshaw.
Mayor Wooten, thank you, sir. As we do every month, I first want to thank the listeners and I want to thank the individuals that make this show possible. I think it's a great platform to get out there and ensure that the public here in the city of Cambridge, the citizens, those who own businesses, those who are visiting, understand what's going on, what changes are occurring, the direction of the city as we move forward. Over the course of the last month, there have been a number of things that we've touched on and that we've been working toward. One of the big topics has been the establishment of a human resources position within the city of Cambridge. As it stands right now, the city of Cambridge does not have a human resources professional, and the city manager is tasked not only with managing daily operations of the city and not only with administrative responsibilities within the city, but also tasked with the human resources responsibility within the city. And it's difficult for a single individual to handle all these roles and wear all these hats. So one of the things that we've been looking at is a discussion toward the establishment of that position. And it's been one of the more difficult discussions we've had as a new council thus far because there are varying beliefs or ideas about what that position should look like, but we're working toward a consensus answer to that, and we're hoping that we get to the point where soon we can have that established and it can be functioning in a fashion that's going to be ideal for the needs that exist within the city, not only now, but also as the city organization grows over the course of the next decade or 2 decades. One of the things that we're looking toward and we're hoping to do is ensure that Cambridge isn't left behind in comparison to our neighbors. So that means bringing new businesses here. That means bringing new residents here. That means bringing investment here. And all those things lead to a need and a desire to have a larger and a more robust and a more professional city organization. And so when we talk about human resources, we talk now, of course, about the needs that we have currently, but we also talk about those needs as they'll exist 10 years down the road, because we do know that the city is going to be providing more services as the city grows. One of the other topics that we've been touching on as of late is the ARPA funds that are being provided, the American Rescue Plan funds from the federal government that have now filtered through the state to the city. That fund is being provided to the city in 2 equal disbursements this year and next year of approximately $6 million annually, $6.1 million annually. It'll be about a $12.1 million disbursement at the end of next year. And we're talking about how to use those funds. And it's going to be important to use those funds in a fashion that is smart and that acknowledges that it's a one-time disbursement that we're receiving, but that also looks for the needs that exist for the city and that provide great value for the city. And that means value-added use. That means avoiding interest on purchases. That means things that lead to reinvestment on itself. And so it's important that we don't go out and just make the big shiny purchase, but that we address those needs that have been ignored by the city. I look at it kind of like winning the lottery. Right, but you didn't win the Powerball. You didn't win $150 million. You can't go out and buy that Lamborghini. You've got to do your housekeeping. You won that $500,000 lottery. So now you've got to think about what the best use is. And the best use for most people when they win a lottery like that is to purchase their home or to pay off their mortgage. And so the hope is that we can do those housekeeping things that we need to do and address those needs that we have. Hand it over now to City Planner Pat Escher.
Hi, I'm Pat Escher, and as you know, we're doing a lot of work in the city. We have a lot of development going on. We have the hospital relocating. We have numerous residential developments that are now springing up. We have Longboat Estates has a lot of activity. We're having activity out by the city of Cambridge, DPW office with Heron Point and Waterford Estates. Blackwater Landing, Blackwater Crossing, those are all starting to come to fruition, and we have about 90 multifamily houses going on in Cambridge Commons. We're also working very hard on the establishment of Cannery Park, which will be right next to the Factory F. And we're getting ready to, we're currently constructing, with the assistance of the county, a trail. And from there, we will begin the first phase of the Cannery Park. So we have a lot of good things going on. We recently have a new tractor supply. We have Dorchester Social Services is moving into a new building out there. And then we have our ongoing work on Pine Street, where we're trying to do some revitalization. And we're received a $540,000 grant from DHCD. And in conversations with the state, we anticipate more money coming.
All right, thank you, Ms. Escher. And now we'll introduce Cambridge Police Chief Mark Lewis, who started as a patrolman in Cambridge Police and has come through the ranks. So he's seen just about everything one can see within this force.
Thank you, Mayor. Dealing with the Cambridge Police Department right now, we're working on our recruitment efforts and our manpower issues. We're trying to keep all of our programs, our community policing programs and events manned and up to speed. But right now, our main focus is on that recruitment. To give you an example, in 2010, we were at 52 sworn officers. Today on the street, we're at 35. So that's a huge decrease in manpower. And it seems like we're having to do more and more with less and less. So thanks to the mayor and the new commissioners, they have been very supportive in this recruitment effort. And we're working on getting that manpower up. We have 5 in the police academy now. They were scheduled to graduate in December. And we've just hired 2 certified officers who are on the street currently today. So that it definitely helps to make that difference. And manpower is what we need, especially with the violent crime that's been occurring here recently in the city.
All right, thank you, guys.
The first question that we're going to talk about today is how do we break what is called a business of poverty, where slumlords can just walk away from their worst derelict properties and accumulated unpaid fines.
So I'll let the planning director take this one, and I'll go off of that.
So the city is currently addressing some of those issues and concerns. Recently, we've started passing ordinances trying to deal with landlords and how to make sure the registrations are accurate. If they start being derelict on their properties, that the city will start issuing substantive fines. We're also working on a minimal livability standard. So that's something that the city does not have. Most other jurisdictions do. And that's a baseline of what needs to be in a household for it to be considered safe. So we're working on that. The business of poverty is very interesting because it is an ongoing problem that we have here in the city. But the state and the county have also enacted various legislation which helps us. One thing that we're doing now is some of the worst properties the city is buying at tax sale. And then we're going to either be able to demolish them or rehab them. And so while we're making progress, it is slow, but it is something that we are working with. We also feel that we need to start reaching out to some of the landlords, not as adversaries, but as collaborators, and try and see if there are certain needs that they have that the city can help with, so that we all start working together and trying to improve the housing market in the city of Cambridge.
And just to go off of that as well, Ms. Escher said correctly that we are working on establishment of a minimum livability standard. I know we've been talking about that now probably the last 2 or 3 episodes of Town Hall. And the reason why it's taking so long, we've got to really compare and ensure that what we're doing is ideal and is proper and correct for what we have here in the jurisdiction of Cambridge. And so we're comparing other codes, we're looking at other codes, and we're applying that. In addition to that, something that I've now initiated and we're going to start working toward, and I've spoken to the city attorney about it. I'm hoping to have a meeting soon with some of the commissioners and some of the city staff, is the establishment of an abandoned or derelict property registration program, much like what we have for our rental properties. A lot of jurisdictions, Tacoma Park, City of Baltimore, I believe City of Frederick, City of Salisbury, all have registration standards for properties that are not within positive use. So that's a property that's been without occupancy for 6 months or a year, depending upon which code you look at. It's a property that is abandoned. It's a property that may not be abandoned, but is being left to return to a damaged state. And so we see that a lot here in the city of Cambridge, where we've got what could be good properties, what could be properties that are contributory to a healthy neighborhood, and instead they're left to rot because a landlord or a property owner doesn't have a use for it and doesn't seek to put it back into positive use. And it may cost more to make repairs and put it into positive use than what they are paying in taxes. So what we want to do is have a registration that addresses that, and that also provides a fee-based system for that as well, so that if you have a property that is abandoned, that is only contributing $20 a year to the city tax roll, for example, but is a source of problems for the city police department because of ongoing issues within the property, you know, they've got to contribute to the level where they are going to be a net plus, or at least a baseline flat line with regard to cost versus income on it. So the abandoned property registration is something that we're also going to start looking into here shortly, and that is actually fairly easy to implement. It's just a matter of the various portions that one wants to take from other jurisdictions and use.
Awesome, guys. Our next question is, there have been continuing spats of violence and gunshots being fired almost nightly as of late. Any idea as to what is causing this?
I'll let Chief Lewis to take this one first.
I'll take that one. As you can tell by watching the news, it seems to be socially acceptable in the communities nationwide across the country. But we have young groups of young people, teens and 20s, that are fighting over a turf war, or one area against another area, or gang related, and it just seems to be socially accepted.
Right, and so I do want to point out as well, we are seeing this violence, and it is an uptick, and it is an ongoing problem that we're facing. Some of what people are hearing is fireworks, and that's diminished a great deal since July 4th, but there are times where people are reporting gunshots and it's fireworks. There are other times where people are reporting fireworks and it's been gunshots, but much more the opposite, where it's fireworks rather than gunshots. And it is as much about creating a lack of cohesiveness or cohesion and an increase in confusion with the fireworks as it is anything else. And but we are cognizant of the violence issues. As people know, we've got cameras in some locations. Some of the cameras are being upgraded with regard to technology. That's something we're working on so that we can have better positive identification of folks. And the idea is that we want to have an idea or a knowledge that Cambridge is not the place to come to commit violence, because that's the other thing that we know. We know that there are some people from Cambridge that are involved in the violence, but oftentimes they're goaded by those that are not from Cambridge. There are those that are coming here, taking groups of individuals who are friends or associates and using them for nefarious purposes. And really it is, I say using them, and it's not as though they're using them as a tool, but they are using them in the same way that someone would use another and take advantage of another. They are taking advantage of these people, and they're coming into this community and they're introducing violence by taking advantage of those that live here.
We note that a number of new officers have been sworn in and are in the pipeline. How long before beefed up patrols will be in place?
I'll speak briefly and then I'll hand it over to Chief Lewis. We've sworn in 2 new officers over the course of the last about week and a half. We have 5 officers currently in the academy. That number ties the number of officers, the largest number of officers Cambridge Police has ever put into a police academy. And that other class of 5 was subsequent to September 11th. So we are actually, while other departments continue to struggle, we're struggling too with manpower, but we're addressing it. And we're addressing it because we have a mayor and council and an organization and a city and a police department that all support our police. And so officers see this and they can compare jurisdictions and locations, and they know that Cambridge is a place, one, where they can have a full policing experience. They're not only going to be doing traffic stops, they're not only going to be pulling over people for a taillight out, they're going to be able to be a police. But they're also going to come to a place where we're forward thinking. I think this was the first jurisdiction on the shore, according to Chief Lewis, that had body cams. We're always looking at ways to improve our community policing. And part of that is having more manpower so that officers can enter into that realm. But, we continue to recruit now better than we have for quite some time because while it's difficult to recruit generally, officers are looking at Cambridge, and they're looking at Cambridge as a place that's going to support their police. And so I'm hopeful as well that not only can we move forward with the group that we have, but that the recruiting will continue and that certified officers will come forward and more officers interested in serving, coming through the academy and making a career here will come forward as well.
And just touching on when the officers will be available or more beefed up patrols, they get out of the academy in January. So probably February, March is when we'll see that increase in manpower hitting the streets.
Thank you, guys. Many have lamented the lack of witnesses coming forward, apparently out of fear of retribution. Would more street cameras in problem areas help?
I'll take that. Absolutely, they will. They've been a huge part in our investigative process for the other shootings and other incidents that are occurring in the areas where we have cameras. Our solvability rate goes way up when we have those cameras out there. So I'm a big supporter of the city expanding their camera program throughout the city, not even in high crime areas, but other areas as well, the downtown area, et cetera.
Yeah, and I'll agree with Chief
Right.
Lewis on that.
Down there on the red one, that one, yeah. Because I wasn't talking, I didn't think I needed to be on.
We some technical difficulties, but no, we do think that the cameras are of great use, and they've proven to be of great use. And look, it's not just with regard to identifying suspects; it's also identifying what occurred in an incident. And so you can have an incident where you don't have an idea or knowledge of what's ongoing, and the cameras give you the insight. And look, you may have witnesses that also are dishonest with regard to what occurred, and the cameras give you the true the true outlook of what occurred. So the camera program is a good one. It's one that we want to expand. What we've run into is to expand. There's some broader infrastructure needs that have to occur to get it into some other areas in terms of the wiring and the way that it's set up. So that's something we're exploring and looking into. And also, one of the things that's been discussed too is other alternative methods of surveillance to enter into that idea, but that aren't as intrusive. And so that's something we're discussing as well.
All right, thank you. Can you update us on the so-called Roger problem? Some communities have a panhandling misdemeanor. Do you think Cambridge needs one?
That one's one that I think is difficult because you can have a general panhandling misdemeanor. You can have one that is specific to certain kinds of activities. And so it's something that is in the very initial stages of discussion, but we've got to really be certain that we're addressing the issue that exists and we're not reacting to a single or just one or two circumstances. You never want to write laws to a particular circumstance. You want the circumstances to be applicable back to the laws that are in place. But it is something that's been discussed and something we're looking at. With regard to the situation with the gentleman, Roger, there has been conversation with the nonprofit that he's involved with. There's been conversation with social services. I think that we can find a collaborative solution to this. I know that it's a difficult situation, but let's be honest about what this is too. This is an individual, a person who has a problem and who is from this community and part of this community. And while it's been difficult to address, at the same time, this is an individual that calls Cambridge home. And so we've got to move beyond and not just look at the frustration that is caused for businesses, but also understand the human portion of this.
All right. Thank you, guys. With the hiring of a code enforcement position imminent, what will be the new staffer's top priorities to tackle?
So we hired 2 code enforcers, to be clear, and one left the city shortly after being hired and was unhappy with the nature of the job. It wasn't quite what they had anticipated or expected. So now we've got to go back and rehire and refill that position. When people come on and they're new to the position, there is a level of learning curve that exists. So they start with really, really menial issues, you know, the lawns that aren't cut, the trash accumulation, and then they kind of grow into the position with regard to the other code enforcement issues. I know that the city manager has been trying to make contact with one of the other individuals that was an applicant previously. We'll see what happens with that, and we'll go forward from there.
All right, thank you so much. The sanitary sewer overflow on Water Street isn't a new occurrence, where the storm and sewer lines never properly separated in the West End.
My knowledge is a little bit lessened on this. I do know that one of the issues that they have is deterioration of some of the lines. A lot of the lines in the West End date to the 1920s and the 19-teens. And so we recently had a grant request that was in to FEMA for hardening of those lines to diminish stormwater incursion into the sanitary lines. It appears that was not accepted by FEMA. We're going to look back at other funding mechanisms for that. But there was a lack of separation. It's my understanding over the course of the last 2 decades, some separation has occurred. And it's now as much a matter about continuing the process as it is about trying to reinvent this thing.
Thank you, guys. Chief Lewis, what do you need to help stem the recent violent incidents in Cambridge? Help stem, I mean, maybe stop.
I think the most important thing that we need, community involvement. We need to have the community as stakeholders to basically tell and send a message to these young violent offenders that it's not acceptable here. You're not going to do this in our town. We've got to take our town back. And we have probably 15, maybe 20 violent offenders that we just need to send that message to, and to be able to stop this violence. We're not a Baltimore. We're not a Chicago, where we have thousands and thousands of shootings. We have a condensed area with a few offenders. We need to send that message out. We can't do it alone. We need community support. So that is the most important thing. The community has to get involved. We cannot let this go on. And in addition to that, more officers. I can say nothing more, that more manpower on the street would definitely help.
All right, what is the timeline for hiring of a new city manager? When might an interim manager be appointed?
We are in talks right now with a potential interim. We received a proposal from the potential interim yesterday afternoon. I'm going to go ahead and circulate that this week to the commissioners. We'll probably have a closed session on Monday to discuss particulars of that particular contract. To clarify with regard to the charter and the language within the charter allows for direct appointment of an interim while a permanent manager is being hired. It does not require going to RFP. It does not require being advertised. So we can engage a former manager, we can engage the current manager, we can engage an outside individual. They do have to have the same qualifications as the full-time manager. So they have to have the same educational background and the same work background. How it looks right now, based upon the language within the contract that we've received, if we can come to agreement on that, it would look like we would have that individual take over as the interim manager for a period of 4 to 6 months, and they would take over starting the first full week of September. In the intervening time, the city manager, Patrick Komisky, is going to continue on in his role as serving essentially as the interim manager until a more permanent interim manager comes into place. He offered to do so, and we agreed that that would be agreeable and desirable to have occur, because we don't want to have any kind of gap in the role being open, and we also want to ensure that there's continuity between individuals. So once we have engagement with a potential new manager, that individual will be copied into messages and start receiving literature and information starting probably the second or third week of this month. And there will be a kind of a period where they are in direct communication, and the organizational knowledge is going to be passed on, so it's not just a clean break. With regard to that, though, moving from an interim manager to a full-time permanent manager again, we really want to review everything that's going on within the organization. We want to ensure that the department heads, all the way down to the guys that are mowing grass and are in the maintenance departments, that everyone's operating at best efficiency and that the roles are clearly delineated. And so to ensure that, one of the goals we're going to have with an interim manager is ensuring the organizational structuring and the organizational vitality that we have within the city. And we'll go from there and make corrections as necessary, so that when a new permanent manager comes into place, they're coming into a situation where they're not having to make repairs, but they're coming into an organization that is going to be successful for them, and they can have their best success, and the city of Cambridge can have its best success as well. Expectation for a full-time manager is going to be probably 6 to 8 months for that permanent manager to be hired. I do want to add to that as well that we are going to also be engaging a headhunter to ensure that we have the best and the broadest group of candidates possible. One thing we've seen previously here in the city is by not doing the fullest diligence with regard to the hiring, there's a limited number of candidates that come forward, and we want to ensure that we've got a broad candidate base this time so that we can get who Cambridge deserves to fill that kind of role.
Thank you, guys. And it looks like we have a question from Joe Sante on Facebook. It says, when will it be possible to tour the packing house and talk with someone about the available spaces?
I'll speak briefly on that and then hand it over to the planning director. I spoke this morning with Bill Struver of Cross Street Partners. Cross Street is the lead developer on the project. They're excited about where things are going. They're working on some of the space being filled. Of course, some of it's already spoken for, but they're working on final planning on some of the design for the shared workspace and on some of the leasable space. And with that, they continue to have an anticipated opening in mid-late fall. And I have some things to add to that.
So no, that pretty much wraps it up. But if you're interested in, wanting to take a tour, then I would encourage you to reach out to Margaret Norfleet with Cross Street Partners, and she could arrange a time where you can tour around. As the mayor indicated, we're hoping that it's going to be if not fully open, partially open by mid-September. And we're also hoping that our park will be, the first phase will be completed around that time also. So it'll be a very exciting time for the city, and really looking forward to all that happening.
All right, thank you. If you have a question you'd like to have answered, please submit it, and we'll consider that and share it. The next question is this. With just a single code enforcement officer, is it realistic to keep the notion of a livability standard under discussion?
Yeah, I think it still is. We're in a situation where we've got to fill these roles and fill these positions, and that's one of the goals of working toward having a human resources department that's robust and capable. Because what we find is the positions go unfilled for long periods because there are other more immediate concerns that are being faced by the city manager. It's so much role to give to a single individual, and so we have a situation where because he's putting out the fires that exist on a day-to-day basis, it's hard to get scheduled interviews for folks and get them in. So while we're at the point now where ultimate hiring responsibility may yet rest with the manager, we also have to understand that all the paperwork and all the background information and all these things have to be done through another avenue that lessens the burden upon a single individual. And doing that allows us to then fill these positions faster. And so we have one of those positions open now. And what we're hoping is that as we continue to have investment in the city, and as we continue to see individuals purchase or build homes here, as we continue to see reinvestment in our communities, that the increasing valuations that will occur and the available tax base that's going to exist allows us to expand from 2 code enforcers to 3 code enforcers to 4 code enforcers. And likewise, the abandoned property registration would contribute to that as well. And anything that we would have with regard to any kind of a tiered licensing system for rental properties would also contribute to that. That's something that's been discussed at length by Commissioner Roach. He believes in deeply. Commission President Cephas is on board with that as well. And so a system where those quote unquote repeat offenders with regard to properties below code, they have to pay a higher registration fee. It's essentially a penalty for not keeping your properties to code. And so having that kind of a system in place, which is quite successful in other places, the model that Commissioner Roach is looking at is Minneapolis, but it's done across the country in various municipalities and jurisdictions. That will allow us to be able to hire and maintain these individuals. So, when we came into office, we had no one doing code enforcement. We had one individual in the department that was saddled full-time with permits. Briefly, we had 2. We're back to 1. But the point I'm making is that we are working toward the point where it's a permanent 2. And then really, I would even hope that we can get to a permanent 3 and a permanent 4 one day.
Thank you, guys. With one traditional Poplar Street opening parking lot being taped off by the owner, is the city considering providing public parking nearby for those business customers?
So I think this is one that we can actually all touch on in various ways. I'll touch on it first. So the city has pretty expansive parking in the downtown. It's just not very visible. Everyone knows the city parking lot that exists next to the old city hall, that's behind like Jimmy and Sook's, Made in Maryland, Bob the Barber, across from the former Chesapeake Equipment, and across from the district courthouse. And so that's a city lot that a lot of people utilize. But the city also owns the lots behind the district court, owns the lots behind Chesapeake College, owns the lot that's accessible off of Muir Street around Academy. The city also has extensive parking behind the Blackwater Bakery and the former Lutheran Mission location. Some of that's private, some of that is owned by the city. So there's pretty extensive parking that's out there. It's just a matter of visibility. I think what we would be well served to do, and something that's not yet come up as a priority for me, but that we're going to have to look at sooner than later, is improving knowledge and visibility of the parking that does exist. Everyone's been utilizing the lot off of High Street that's being referenced, and the lot by the courthouse, or I should say by the old city hall. But there's a lot of parking that's not being utilized that's actually in some cases probably more accessible or more proximate to the properties that are being accessed. I don't know if the planning director can speak to parking in the city and kind of what the city code requires or allows in that regard as well.
Well, I don't really have a lot to add, but one thing that within the city, Within that core area, we don't really have stringent parking requirements, and in part is because of the age of the buildings and how it works. We're trying to make that to be more pedestrian friendly. So as the mayor said, there is ample parking. I think it really is a question of just getting people to know where it is and how it's available to them.
And Chief, you were at a meeting regarding that lot. I don't know if you want to add anything that you heard or experienced from that meeting.
Yeah, there was a meeting with the downtown or Poplar Street area where we talked about utilizing those back parking lot areas for additional parking, especially when the streets are closed down. We also got into the fact that downtown during the daytime, there's a 2-hour parking limit. So we have to get back up there and start enforcing that 2 hour to get those vehicles moved along so they're not parked there all day long, taking up parking spaces.
Right. And so one of the things that's been discussed, and this is related, not fully related back to this, there's been a lot of discussion as of late regarding the street closures on Poplar Street and the loss of street parking that results from that. And one thing that's being discussed and looked at, and the city engineers actually drawn some design studies on this, is redesigning Poplar Street to operate one way into the West End and flipping the Gay Street alignment so that it filters instead of from the Race and Poplar intersection to High, and alternatively filtering from High back to that intersection, with the thought being that it provides a traffic loop of sorts so that those entering the West End have a direct route out of the downtown into the West End, and those that are exiting the West End have a direct route back into the downtown should they choose to enter into the downtown area. And in doing that, one of the things that is maintained is all that street parking along Poplar Street. One of the things that we want to ensure is that no matter whether there's a change in alignment on any of the streets or not, that the parking remains available for everybody.
All right, thank you so much. We understand the city is considering a grant to Cambridge Main Street. Do other cities provide monetary support to their Main Street organizations?
They do. In fact, Cambridge is one of the only jurisdictions or municipalities that has not historically done that on a regular basis, at least in the state of Maryland and potentially nationwide. What we find is that Main Street's able to fill a lot of the gaps that exist that we wouldn't otherwise be able to address. And so that's everything from events in the downtown to flags on the street poles to acting as a bit of an advocate for the business owners and everything in between. What we are finding right now, Cambridge Main Street's executive directorship has been open since late November of 2020. We're now in August of 2021. And so the Main Street organization here has not been as robust or as involved as it has historically been. And that's leading to a lot of questions and discord on the part of some of the business owners and the downtown advocates and the various stakeholders. And what we're hoping is that this funding can in part help provide for a better salary to bring in a very capable and intelligent and well-versed and experienced Main Street director that can fill that gap and that can come into play and immediately have an impact, whether that be from grant funding or event coordination or business advocacy. We've kind of limited how many strings we've put on the funding for now because we want them to be able to best utilize the funding within what was budgeted, but at the same time we have to be aware and we have to address the various needs that do exist with regard to the core Main Street mission.
Thank you, guys. For Pat and Chief Lewis, if you could wave a magic wand and improve one thing about the structure of your role in the city, what would make the most impact?
Feel free to hit on 2 or 3.
Pat, you go first.
Okay, well, due to the pandemic, we've been short-staffed, so obviously getting some staff back at DPW would be, really beneficial. And so I would not be just putting out fires. I'd have to be more proactive and thoughtful about some of the things that we are currently trying to do in the city. I think that's really pretty much it. And we did try and advertise in the spring. We had a candidate, and unfortunately that didn't work out. So we're back advertising. Anyone knows a urban planner who wants to come to Cambridge, please let me know.
Okay. Well, of course, with my role, I'm going back to the manpower issue. We need to find good young men and women who want to do the job. I'd like to have local young men and women from this area because I know they'll stay. If they're committed and they live here, they'll stay. Oftentimes we have young men and women that come from on the other side of the Bay Bridge and they stay for a year or two and then they move on, which does not help because then we're training these young men and women to go elsewhere. We're a training ground. So we need these young officers to stay here. We need to pay them well, train them well, provide them with the equipment that they need to be able to do their job properly. And we need to get back to that 52 officer level. We need to get these officers from working 12 hours, 16 hours a day at times, back to 9 hours a day. Because when you work that many hours, that's just room for the officers to be tired and for mistakes to happen. And that's something in this climate that we have today, that's something that we don't need. So we need well-trained and more young officers.
All right, appreciate that a lot. Mike Detmer submitted a question that asks this: can you comment on the situation of homelessness in the city?
I think first, if we could have Chief Lewis comment on what his officers see or what the experience is, and then we'll follow up.
It seems like we have just a few homeless individuals, and we try everything that we can do to get them the help that they need, but oftentimes that they refuse the help from the medical personnel or the mobile crisis unit. So we're just in that in-between stage of what can we do as a city to try to help these individuals. They're all local people that are in a bad place for whatever reason. It doesn't do any good to arrest them. They don't need that. They need to some other type of counseling or help, and to be able to get back to be a useful member of society. And that's what we have to do, whether it be Salvation Army, finding the places for them to live, what have you. But it's just there again. It's something that as a city we need to find that solution.
And I'll add to that. I think that we have for quite some time had issues of homelessness in Cambridge. It's just become perhaps more visible or noteworthy as we're coming out of the pandemic. Various organizations haven't been able to provide the services to the level that they normally have, or there's been limitation with other services. And so it's going to be interesting as we continue to move forward to see just how this evolves. One thing that we're going to have to do and continue to address is those individuals who are homeless that are involved in criminality as a result of that homelessness. I think we had a violent crime recently that involved one or two homeless individuals with some knife play. So that's really one of the big negatives that exists with the issue, is that these individuals are in a desperate situation, whether it be for food or housing or whatever it may be. And the Eastern Shore as a whole has never really been positioned in such a way that can address it as robustly or as necessarily as we would like to. I know that in talking to the Salvation Army, there are times where they feel overwhelmed with the number of people coming to their shelter. They continue to provide the service to the best level that they can. And there's some discussion of expansion of shelter facilities, if not through Salvation Army, then through others. But ultimately, we've got to ensure that those individuals that are in this condition are receiving the services they need, and we're working to get them out of that condition. And so that's also about education, and that's about providing motivation to get out of the condition. Interestingly, last night following the council work session, I was standing outside speaking to, I believe, Commissioner Roach, and we were approached by a gentleman, and he asked for a few dollars, as is often the case, and explained that he was homeless. And we said, "Well, where are you from, buddy?" And he said he had grown up in Cambridge, but he had left Cambridge. He had lived in Ohio for the last 25 or 30 years, since the 80s, so probably like 35 years actually. And when he turned down on hard luck and problems came forward, he ended up back in Cambridge. And it's difficult because I think we do have at times individuals that relocate here because we do have some accessibility to services that other Eastern Shore communities do not. But we've got to ensure that we're utilizing those resources for those that call Cambridge home. And then once we reach that level where we've addressed the internal issue, then we can turn to the outside and perhaps make a change. But really right now, the issue that we have within the community is so great that we can't serve as the aid to other communities as well in this regard, unfortunately. One of the things that we've got to do, and I'm working on getting set up, is a work session or presentation from social services to the council, so they can provide information with regard to what they're doing and what their role is, and then we can have the discussion of how the city can aid a state agency in addressing this issue within our community.
All right, thank you so much again. For all of you, what can the citizens do to help in your role as a leader in making Cambridge a great place to live?
Pat?
I would think, reaching out to city staff if you have questions, concerns, or if you have positive ideas or some thoughts. Sometimes we are, at our jobs doing our work, and we don't have the ability sometimes to think out of the box. So if you have a really creative idea, please give me a call. I'm always at City Hall, not City Hall, DPW. And let's collaborate. There are so many things that we can do in the city to keep it moving forward. There is a great forward motion right now. I've been here 6 years, and I've seen it steadily build. So let's be creative and figure out how we can keep that momentum going and have Cambridge turn the page to become the great city that it really has the potential of being.
Chief Lewis?
Get involved. That's what we need our citizens to do. Take their neighborhoods back, take their streets back. We cannot do it alone. Oftentimes we arrive after the fact, and we just need the community involvement to help us with this. It would make a huge difference, and it would make a huge statement to these young offenders that are out here doing this, that it's just not acceptable, as I said a few minutes ago. We just need your help.
I think for me, something that we've discussed as of late, and that Pat touched on, continue to reach out to us when you have a concern, when you have a need. We've got to know. I had a call yesterday from a friend who had a conversation with a citizen, and the citizen said, well, it seems as though the mayor and council don't care about this particular issue. And I called the citizen and I said, it's not that we don't care, it's that we weren't aware. If we don't know, then we can't address the problem that exists, and we can't work with the staff. We can't work with Chief Lewis. We can't work with the planner, Miss Escher. We can't work with DPW to address the issues if we don't know that they're there. And so I think there's always a belief that someone else has reported it, so I'm not going to. But look, if you've got something that's a city need, reach out to us. We might not be able to respond immediately. We might not be able to respond in a week. But once we have knowledge and we have the ability, we're going to. but we have to have people step forward and let us know what's going on so that we can respond. It's the old what is the psychological phenomena, bystander effect. Something will occur, and no one will call the police because everyone thinks that someone else has called the police. And so I think likewise with issues within the city, there are issues that exist and people don't reach out and step forward because they think someone else has. And the reality is that most of the time someone hasn't. So we just don't know unless someone lets us know. So the biggest thing is really just open lines of communication between us as elected officials, us as appointed and bureaucratic officials, and the citizens at large.
Thank you guys so much. Great discussion this hour as each time we get together, but we are out of time for today. A reminder that this broadcast will be heard in its entirety this coming Sunday at 1 p.m. right here on WHCP. I'm Marco Garcia.
And I'm Dave Wooten, reminding you that Town Hall will return next month, again at our new date, the first Tuesday of the month. So that will be September the 7th at high noon. Until then, our thanks to Technical Director Julian Jackson, Mayor Bradshaw, and Chief Lewis, and City Engineer Pat Escher. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Marco.
Thank you guys.
Thanks.